Yeah, are we live? Yeah. What happened to our little intro bit?
I don't know where to go.
Go on. Right, is that take two, or is it still take one, or is it take 1.5?
Let's go.
Let's go. We're back. We are back. I wouldn't call it a new slot, just a different slot. This is not a regular slot, but we wanted to make sure that Gary was here. Hello.
Thank you. That's very kind.
Yeah. And James Robbins is back. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Yeah, not bad.
Good. Already getting some nice evening alls from our viewers, our listeners. Evening to Stradders, Louis Stevenson, Mark McNamara, Norman Stanley Fletcher. I'm not going to say hello to everyone. Norman Stanley Fletcher is correct. It's the evening. There is alcohol involved, especially if Gary's here. Launchport Studios. It's not got its own brewery like the South Stand, but there is a keg going on, so Gary always gets the beers going. And Gary, you've been away this weekend?
Yeah, I couldn't go to the game yesterday. I think I said the last time that I was on. We had my sister-in-law's 40th birthday, and we went down to the south coast and stayed in a lovely villa for a couple of days. Windy walks along the beach, catered meals.
So
very nice.
You went to Bournemouth?
Around that sort of area, maybe.
Did you come back with Andoni Iraola?
No, he said in the summer. So pop back.
Pop back.
Yeah.
All right, James, good weekend?
Yeah, good weekend. I mean, finally nice to be happy about a match, to be honest.
Yeah, I've not done too many pods on the back of wins. It's normally Jake Robson, but I am here. All right, we'll go straight in with some club news. The under-21s are currently playing as we speak. Gary Diamond, what's the score?
2-0 last I checked.
2-0 down.
Not to us, to City.
They are losing 2-0.
It was 0-0 at half time, I think.
Yeah. All right, so they're into the second half. They finished pretty soon, actually. Kicked off at 7. They are 2-0 down at Manchester City. The 18s had no game. They lost 4-2 at Watford in the FA Youth Cup 5th round. Lost their discipline. Ended up with 9 men. So they are out of a domestic cup. Classic. I'm not sure any of the teams now are in any domestic cups. I'm sure, actually, I think the 18s might still be in that Premier League Cup. And the women lost 5-0 at Arsenal. They were so bad. They were so bad.
Yeah, I mean, that's a terrible result for a team that's been on the up and generally had a fair enough season. And they've never beaten Arsenal. Oh, no, they have once, actually. They have once. Yeah. And it was away, but you just want more than that, don't you?
And Beth England even said it.
Yeah.
The WSL, I mean, the quality gulf between the entire league is mental.
Yeah.
I mean, it's...
But on that, are we not building a completely new training pitch and training centre for the women? I mean, there's a lot going into the
White
women.
Webs, which I think was a hotel, was a site, certainly a site.
A big parkland.
Yeah, in
basically.
Enfield.
There's nothing there.
Right.
But they've got the planning permission now, so that's something that's going to be happening.
It's an academy.
Oh, is it? I thought it was a women's academy, but also where the women would actually go to train.
I think probably the same, but they train on, obviously, when we signed Alex Morgan on loan, she basically said, I'm only signing if the women's team can train at Hotspur Way.
Oh, right.
I don't think they were.
Oh, right. No, they weren't.
And now they do. And because I don't know if you've seen the social videos, there's definitely a different area for them because they do the same like player arriving. Videos.
Yeah, it was a different entrance.
Different entrance. So they definitely train there. But yeah, I think it's going to have a women's academy, some more lodging, different facilities, and then also kind of furb the whole land, because that was a big thing. A lot of the local people were like, "Oh my god, someone's buying it." But I think the other option was it becoming a waste dump.
Right.
So
like where the Emirates used to be. It was a waste dump.
So yeah, it's going to be.
Okay.
No, so it's the point being, there's the women's football is going to get a lot of investment,
which
it needs, and I think the 5-0 away defeats to Arsenal will hopefully be a thing of the past in years to come.
Okay. Would you like so that's it really for the club news. We'll obviously come to the men who beat Man United 1-0. As a title of this pod this week suggests, lads, it's Man United. I mean, we always beat Man United. So we've got a new section. Would you like to see it? So I get it out. and then we'll do the new section. Is it after the watershed? All right. James tells me if I press this button here, and then I press this button here, something. There you go. So this is a section about what goes on in our WhatsApp group. If you are privileged to be in our WhatsApp group, you get to see the absolute nonsense that we talk about, what gets our goat, what makes us laugh, but mainly being Tottenham fans, what we whinge about.
I mean, this is a terrifying concept.
Because you don't know what know what I've got in here.
Yeah.
And bear in mind, not all of this is fact. This is just the stuff that winds us up during the week. So I'm going to press. Which one should we go for first? Oh well, this is linked to almost like what the club are expending money on. Linked to the injury. Spurs, from Alistair Gold, Spurs have submitted plans for new medical facilities and an improved treatment room at Hotspur Way. Needed.
Yeah, they've been rehabbing in the hallways.
I mean, is the treatment room what's needed, or just people that actually understand injuries and how to fix them?
Well, based on that, we were talking about. Oh no, I did press the wrong button. I've ruined it all, James. I've ruined it all, James. We talked about
Saved it.
We talked about sprints per match. I think you were interested in this, Gary.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this would be something we'd talk about later, because essentially I have sort of been making the point that the way we play is unsustainable, and there was a great graphic where we are in the top right-hand corner for intensity, both with and without the ball. And James made the point, well, that's actually dropped off quite a lot in the last few games. That's not quite as and that's what this graph here shows. But I'm sure we'll come back to that, because we've got, I think, differing views on that. Maybe
Not differing, but I'm here to be as positive as possible this week.
Well, we'll come back to it, because you made some very good points earlier on our group when we were discussing this about the frequency of games, and you don't like UEFA very much for what they're doing at the minute. Do we talk about that now, or should we?
No, we'll come back to it.
We'll come back to that.
One thing that this sprint per matches graphic was on the back of, we were talking about games missed by certain players, Van der Ven, and you made the point, James, that you said that Van der Ven was a little bit broken at previous club.
Yeah, he had not necessarily that he was broken at his previous club, but his first hamstring injury was not with us. Was my main point. And then I was looking online, and there was a thread about why might Van der Ven be prone to hamstring injuries, and why are certain players predisposed to kind of getting injured more often, and often like muscle imbalances. And Andrew actually spoke in the press conference about how we're fine leaving Van der Ven for a few more weeks to make sure that he can have his 10 years, because if it keeps happening, it's just going to snowball. And then looking into different reasons why he specifically might get them. And funnily enough, some of the people that were talking about why players get hamstring injuries, and it's their bums aren't big enough.
Is that right?
The hamstring to glute ratio is not good enough.
Okay.
So I mean, I haven't checked out.
Is that why I don't get many hamstring injuries? Okay.
Dump truck.
And then we obviously giggled about Christian Romero's injuries. I mean, look at this. Too many injuries. He's missed. I mean, I'm not going to do any quick maths, but I don't know, over 70 odd games, 50 games. I don't know how many he's missed in the last few years. Far too many. And a couple of other things. We're going to come on to the protest very shortly. But there was a message that was put out just before the protest, which annoyed me personally this week. Was this from Kat Lucas, who's a journalist, who wrote an article on Levy out protest that happened, and look, we'll talk about that shortly. And no, we're not against the protest. It's every right for this protest to happen, but to come out and say that Tottenham Hotspur is as big a footballer disaster as the Premier League has ever seen, that wound me up, because I think there's a lot more nuance to the situation than that. But that got my goat up this week. Another thing that got our goat up was this graphic. Gary, you hated that graphic.
That's a disgrace, isn't it? I mean,
Leicester's results in the Premier League this season. I'll just read them out for those who may listen to the pod.
The last 10
don't
games.
watch it. The last 10 games, yeah. Lost 4-0 to Newcastle, 3-0 to Wolves, 3-1 to Liverpool, 2-0 to City. Okay, those are tough games, though. 2-1 to Villa, 2-0 to Palace, 2-0 to Fulham, 4-0 to Everton, 2-0 to Arsenal, and sandwiched a little bit in between that at the bottom, a 2-1 win against Tottenham Hotspur.
Yeah, 1 win in 10 against us.
Yeah.
That's disgraceful.
We're only one of 2 bottom half teams in that list, though, Gary. So, it's expected.
Come
It's
on
going to be
now.
anyone. It's going to be us or Wolves. Because
So those are the things that have wound us up. They've probably wound you up as well. We didn't get wound up by Spurs announcing they were going to build a new centre for the women's football. That's investment that's required. But after that, injuries, Leicester losing a lot of games apart from beating us, a couple of things on the protest. Those are the things that wound me up. James, you're going to have to remind me how to get out of this graphic. There you go. Look at that. So there you go.
seamless.
And I'm sure if you went through any Tottenham fans WhatsApp group across the world,
Be very similar.
very, very similar. But those are the things that got us going. Okay, let's start before we talk about the game itself. The protest before the game, without a doubt, probably the biggest protest I think at Spurs since they started talking about moving to Stratford, which was a well-organised protest and ultimately had the desired effect. I would say there was upwards of 2,000 to 3,000 or 2,000 people at this protest. Started to gain media traction for the first time. I got in the car after the game and they were talking about it on both TalkSport and specifically 5 Live, where even on 5 Live, the presenter whose name now escapes me, was talking to John Murray and he was getting updates from him. So, we've talked about the Levy thing here. I'm not sure anyone's really Levy in. Or funnily enough, listening to 5 Live on the way home, a few people called in Chris Sutton were Levy in, and they seem to be older Spurs fans. I don't know whether there's a trend there. Louis Stevenson says, was the Super League protest as big? Well, Super League protest was during COVID. I remember a load of Chelsea fans outside the ground. I don't think they were actually supposed to be there, but everyone had given up by then. But that was kind of during COVID. And this is a movement that is growing and growing faster than ever before, I imagine.
But it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because, it depends what you read. There was a big BBC article about it that was quite well written as well. But then, you're scrolling through Twitter and you'll see, threads from fans of other teams commenting on it. And, we had a comment last week that wound me up from a viewer saying Spurs fans are entitled because of the way that I was talking. But actually this thread from other fans was like, Spurs fans are entitled because Daniel Levy, from an outside perspective, has done a great job. And what it really comes down to from Spurs fans is, yes, but it's the trophies. Yep. I think that's really, really, really what it mostly comes down to. And then you throw in...
You mean from outside?
Yeah, right. So from outside, they're saying, look, you look at Tottenham, right? You look at what this is a thread on Twitter today. You look at Tottenham and you look at, what he took over and where they are now. And the fact that they have, in one of these threads, and I think it was a load of Reading fans that were discussing it, they had a graph of Spurs League finishers, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th,
I saw the
2nd,
really.
And they were saying that Spurs fans are entitled, because actually most clubs would kill to be in our shoes. And they referenced the likes of Everton and Villa. Okay, Villa are having a bit better time of
Newcastle
it at the moment. Newcastle, Leeds, big clubs, right? And they're saying you look at where Tottenham have done and what they've done in the last 15, 20 years, and it's so much better than all but 4 or 5 other clubs, okay? And not many other clubs are winning things either. So, I think I've made this point before. I think a lot of fans of a lot of other clubs, if they could have Daniel Levy as their chairman, absolutely would have him. On the flip side, when you're inside it, right, and it's a part of it, and all we really want and crave is success, and also when you've been within touching distance for as long as we have, and it has been so close, and we're not going that extra yard, and you are seeing the revenue the club is bringing in, and you are seeing that 40% wage to revenue by a distance the lowest, and that
but also
tells
things
you,
like the concessions. We're not the only club doing it.
all of that sort of stuff. So when you're inside it is a different matter. But it is just a much more, as we've always said, a much more nuanced debate than I think a lot of people want to make it.
Yeah, the issues are relative, right? Yeah, like fair play. Reading really don't want to be in their position. Much prefer to be in our position. But we've been knocking on the door for so long and no one's opened it.
Correct.
One of those finals, I do think we've been very unlucky. I mean, the amount of
Gary
finals and
Beck's
semi-finals
15
we've been in-
semi-finals,
exactly.
6 finals.
You'd expect the penny to drop in one of them, and you actually win it. But winning finals and winning trophies is really hard. If you look back at the last decade, how many teams in this country have What's the diversity of teams?
Well,
winning the
I can
trophy?
tell
Not
you.
much.
I can tell you. In Levy's time, in Levy's tenure as chairman, 87% now of the 3 domestic trophies have been monopolised by 5 clubs.
Exactly, and we're the
And
sixth club, and we are ultimately the 6th club. In
well,
that top
it's
6.
Leicester, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Leicester is the stick with. Leicester is
Yes.
actually the stick with which to beat us. Okay,
Mm.
they played Chelsea in a final and overcame the bigger team. We've done that loads of times and haven't overcome the bigger team. And Leicester freakishly won the league. Leicester is the club to beat us with, but to hold us up against 2 financial cheats is not fair.
Yeah.
And then you've got the 3 absolute behemoths of clubs, which are Liverpool, United, and unfortunately the other lot, who traditionally have always been more successful than us.
And the problem now is we're at the point where we promised. We're promised we're going to kick on and compete.
This is the
Unfortunately,
problem.
we probably overachieved with Pochettino during that time.
Yeah.
And then we kind of fell off as we went into our big shiny new stadium.
Yeah.
And we're the win now managers where it didn't happen. And that wages to revenue thing, I was thinking about that today. No one actually puts any context around it, but I just want to say it's like, oh, why is that bad? What's the problem? You know, teams that put more wages into their revenue do better. It's like, it's not as simple as that. It's that we're never really in the conversation for those big players that we have the money to sign. Nico Williams is one that I think will be the next one that would have transformed our team. That I think he'll go somewhere else probably, or he might go to Barcelona. That's where he wants to go. But I don't think we'll be in the conversation.
No.
And we never are. And it's not to say we buy bad players. We spent big money on Solanke, and I think he's absolutely fantastic. We've bought some of the top young talent around. If Tell signs, I think that's a real coup for the club.
And that is a big player.
But it's a big player, 19-year-old, not going to be on the massive wages.
Sure.
So
yeah.
it's about established players. And I think that what irks the fans is the amount of time now. We've been in this stadium, we've got nothing to show for it.
Absolutely.
But it's not just about the trophy. People weren't moaning about trophies as much under Poch. I mean, they were, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't as loud because, I don't know, I was just happy. It was really nice to win almost every game you play. And
yeah, but we were getting
to
to like April and May before we knew we weren't going to win a trophy.
Yes.
And most of the time we were out of trophies by February.
Yeah. And now it's just that we've got everything else, but not the true thing that shows for it. And loads of people been saying, oh, Tottenham really a top 6 side now. So yeah, because we won the 6th most trophies in this country. And I
with
think
the
Man
6th
City
highest
have
wages.
just overtaken us, I think, this season.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gary Neville last night was saying Spurs are bigger than City.
Yeah.
We are.
And
Historically, we are.
Yeah. The issues are relative, and fans are entitled to be angry and protest. And to be honest, I think most of the protests in the past have been a waste of time. It's been a small minority of people. To see it actually get traction now, fair play to everyone that's turned up.
But I don't know that it's going to result in Levy out. It seems to me, it feels to me as though Levy's looking for investment or to sell anyway. Okay,
Yeah.
I think that's on the cards in any event. So, you know, if that happens in the next couple of weeks, months, or whatever, it won't have been because of this protest. But what it could do, and I think this is the key thing, I think the more important thing is it sends a message: we want to see you pushing harder. Because I agree with you. I've sort of, as I said on this pod a week or two ago, I've always understood where Levy is coming from. It has been frustrating, massively, but I have understood they want to build the infrastructure and generate that revenue that will consistently put us in a position where we can compete. I've always mitigated and given him leeway for that. But even I'm a little bit like, I even said, COVID just after we moved in. Okay, it buys him another couple of seasons. But we are now at that point where it's like, there really aren't excuses at this point to be upping that wage to revenue, the overall spend, and really putting our foot to the floor and accelerating.
I've been trying to leave you out with everyone at the ground when I've gone in recent times. But to give Levy credit where credit is due, the club has run incredibly. We have come a long way since 2001. You know,
but it's time for change.
It's time. It's either he has to change and make.
That's
correct.
That's my next question.
That was it.
That was going to be my
change,
question.
exactly.
If Levy changed, would people care?
So I said this in a chat the other day. They were like, "Oh, if we get bought by someone rich and they leave Levy in charge, it's just more of the same." I was like,
it's not.
No, because he's answering to a different person with a different remit. And Levy with money does spend. We do spend money. So I'm not too sure on if I agree with people in that respect. Also, the people that say he doesn't want to win,
I disagree.
I disagree with them completely
Correct.
because success means the club is worth more, and ultimately, he's an investment company that wants to sell it.
I have another theory on it, and actually, I don't. I think Levy is a careful businessman,
Mm-hmm.
but I think a lot of how we're being run at the moment, you've got to keep in mind, Levy is a minority shareholder compared to Joe Lewis, and he answers. Huh?
His family now, because after all that scandal he had, I think they had to divulge it all.
But Joe Lewis is the main guy, and he answers ultimately to Joe Lewis. To me, if I want somebody out, it's probably Joe Lewis. I would have no problems with investors coming in and saying to Levy, right, this is how we'd now like the club to be run. You don't need to worry about financial security. We've got that. All right. Go and put your foot to the floor and really make this a success. So you agree with
Strathers, who says, all we want is Levy, this could be a song, all we want is Levy to stop being involved in football. Wow, he says including football, including financial decisions. Are you saying you want Levy away from the football, stop hiring people with respect, like Langer and Munn, who might not be up to it?
I don't think he is that involved in the football.
No.
Like, you probably got more insight on this, but I don't think he actually is that involved in the football. I think people get that idea because he is reported to go and close deals at a final stage. But then the CEO of any company dealing with multi-million pound deals is always going to be involved in the minutiae of the detail.
He's either going to sign the paperwork, or he's going to be like, all right, we need to get this over the line. I'm in now.
Correct. It comes down to him. But I don't think he's driving that.
As Ali Minson here says, shouldn't it be Enoch out? Some banners are Enoch out, some are Levy out. For a lot of people, it's the same.
Levy's in the stadium. It's easy to chant at him. He's the visible one.
Yeah.
You don't hear about Enoch much anymore. He's the face of it. And again, okay, so Strada's saying CEO delegates. So in the last 2 years, we have had Fabio Paratici come in, overhaul a department, and then that's been further developed by Johan Langer. The footballing side day to day is run by Scott Munn. And I mean, Scott Munn, people are going, Munn out. And it's like, well, no, Scott Munn is running lots of things. Like he's probably looking after the training ground. Probably a big part of this medical department. He's running everything to do with football. That's just not managers and signings. There's a lot that goes into the football department at a football club. Levy is a CEO that's going to oversee it all. It doesn't mean that he's now micromanaging every single little bit of it.
And Strada's saying, you're joking, that's not true, Gary, because CEO delegates. I don't think, listen, I'm no CEO of you may have noticed, I'm not a CEO of a multi-million pound business, but I would find it hard to believe that any CEO of a multi-million pound business doesn't sign off when it comes to the deals that are being done, right? I can't imagine that he just goes, oh yeah, Scotty man, you of course he's going to want to be all over it. He's going to want to look at the detail. He's protecting the club.
Well, he's got to be the one that's like either sets or deals with the strategy. And I think up until recent times, he probably was heavily involved over the last 2 decades. But in recent times, if you look at the structure the club has brought in, he is far less involved. If you have an issue, which I think, like I do and lots of people do, it's the overarching strategy and the kind of the area the club is working in that is ultimately set by him. People get annoyed about little things is what irritates me. You need to give credit where credit's due, and you need to have issues with valid parts of his tenure.
I think that's a lot of people with their head on straight will say the same, James. But ultimately, as Ollie said, you said, we've all said, since 2019, it's probably gone in the wrong direction. Let's move it on. We've got Jon Mackenzie coming on in about 15 minutes, and I want to talk about Man United before we get John to talk about Ange. He's been a little bit focused a lot more on Ange, certainly since the Villa game. Sorry, Gary.
Just come back because we didn't include it in club news. A couple of players that we wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
I'll hand to you because you saw more.
Yeah. So first was Yang Min Hyuk at QPR. He got his first assist the other day. Looks like he's taken the championship really well so far. He's not played much, but he looks like he fits in. Really small. I was comparing him to Brian Hill in my head, and I was thinking Brian Hill is a very talented player that is absolutely not cut out for English football. We'll probably struggle in the Bundesliga, probably struggle in the Belgian league, but he'll play really well in the Liga. And it looks like he'll fly away if there's a small breeze. Yang's probably shorter than him, but looks stockier, way quicker over 5-10 yards. And his assist was excellent. The touch around the defender on rushing him was sublime. Really quick down the line and a properly driven cross across the ground. Reminded
goal.
me of Aaron Lennon. Like it was so Aaron Lennon.
In terms of sort of stature and size and style of play, I was wondering if he's a bit Manor Solomon.
Maybe, yes. I think that's a good comparison. I think it's good. But they had a moment on the touchline where he kind of created an attack on his own. It looks like it was all boxed in, and he skinned a defender, and I think played a 1-2, and then continued an arching run all the way around to the other side of the pitch to support the attack. I was like, this is really good stuff. And I think the language of football is important. QPR released one of those videos, a bit like Spurs do, that kind of uncut, where they have the camera on the touchline and they get a tight angle. And he's talking with all the players, talking with Jimmy Dunn, I think is their captain, and stuff. And people were like, "Oh, the language barrier is going to be hard." Probably he's learning English still, but the language of football is good, and he can converse with his teammates. I think that's probably why they're trusting.
Yeah, I don't
him
think
so
they
quick.
wouldn't have sent him on loan if they didn't think he was ready, language-wise, football or not. And you had one other ex-Spurs player in the news.
Nabil Bentaleb.
Yeah.
He looked like he was going to have to retire after sadly had a cardiac arrest playing a five-a-side match, and he fortunately survived. And it looked like he was going to have to retire, but he was allowed back to football this week, and he scored on his first game back, which is really great news.
Yeah, put in a famous cross for one of the most famous Kane headers against Arsenal. Last minute or late winner. All right, we've got about 10 or so minutes, 12 minutes to talk about Sunday's game. I will do the lineup for you. Right, precursor to that, Ange had said players were back. We knew Vicario was going to be back. We knew Maddison was going to be back. And we knew that someone else was going to be back. Udogie was going to be back. And I watched the training videos, and it was saying to my old man on the way up, I was like, I think Johnson will be on the bench, which he was. Didn't expect to see Odebear on the bench. I thought he might be another week or so away. But we lined up with Vicario in goal, Porro, Danso, Davies and Spence. In midfield, 3, Bergvall, Bentancur and Maddison. And up front, Kulusevski, Tell and Son. Also, a little glance at Man United subs bench. All teenagers who'd never played for the club.
Just like ours.
And that never got mentioned for 2.5 months, as Ange said later on. All teenagers and Victor Lindelof. As John Murray said on 5 Live, Victor Lindelof looked like the sixth form teacher who's taken them all out on a geography field trip. Look, bench was healthy. It still had no centre half or centre forward on it. Senior players. Scarlett aside, with respect, but he's not Solanke or Richarlison. That's great, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think it was, finally you've got a bench that actually, Ange needs. And I think what's going to be interesting over the coming weeks is a few things. One, the rotation that Ange gives to players, and 2, will players stay fit? Because that is going to ultimately define what happens over the rest of the season. And it could well define whether Ange is here next season. Because you looked at this game yesterday. I think I mentioned in our WhatsApp group, and we don't show the actual texts that we send one another, but I think I said, you look at that United team and our team, and it would have been a bad result to have dropped points. It would have been a poor result. Now I look at the remaining fixtures over the course of the season. There's a couple of tough ones in there. You've got Chelsea away, Liverpool away, got City at home coming up. Outside of that, if you've got a fit squad, I think you win 7-8 games of the last 13. And that's what we should be aiming for. And I don't think that's going to make a huge difference in the league. It's not going to get us into any European spots at this point. But if Ange is winning 7 or 8 out of the last 13 and beating the teams that we should be beating and getting to the semi-final as a minimum of the Europa, and players are staying fit, then maybe he makes a case for himself.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. I think that injury issues have allowed for players, like I said this actually in the WhatsApp as well, it's like Gray and Bergvall to really progress, and it's allowed Spence to also get that chance. And I mean, he's winning the Ballon d'Or, so that's pretty good.
He is indispensable. Would you say?
Indispensable. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. And now I think that hopefully he'll be more keen to rotate, because I think early in the season that I think our recruitment was both exceptional and poor, because he couldn't trust those younger players, and then Odebear, who I think would have been heavily trusted, his hamstring exploded immediately. So I actually don't think you can blame Ange's maybe his style for Odeberg because it just happened. But anyway, there's options now. You can rotate now. Against Ipswich, I really hope that there's some changes coming up. And then just to be able to bring them off the bench.
Yeah, 5 subs yesterday,
Just-
but all first team players.
Yeah, senior players pumping their chest out, confident. Just you know what you're going to get. Even like we've talked about Brennan pretty poorly. I was thrilled to see him back. To be honest,
Yeah.
It's a body.
It's an adult in the room. Like
Yeah.
And I actually think that Johnson off the bench is a very good option.
Yeah, when you said that, as much as you criticise him, you've always said off the bench.
Johnson off the bench is a very, very good option. It was great to see, as you said, Odeberg back. That was a nice surprise, and actually he came on, and as he has done in the fleeting moments that he's played for us so far, I really like the look.
I'm going to let you talk about Odeberg later.
Yeah, it's fine. But I will lead on from Odeberg and his dribbling and say that one thing I thought was really nice yesterday, and I think really, really important and happened with our first choice players coming back, is one-on-ones. And that's not just out wide, but one-on-ones across the pitch. I think Iriola actually spoke about this in a video or interview recently, funnily enough, is that when you have players that can take people on across the pitch, you can break down a block because you're going to pull the opposition team apart. Because as soon as you've dribbled your man, someone else has to come mark.
Correct.
And that leaves space available for someone else.
Which is what Bergwijn was doing in the first half. Casemiro, he couldn't get near him.
So Bergwijn is great at that. I think Archie Gray actually is a good dribbler as well. He wasn't obviously starting. Maddison can do it. Bentancur can do it a little bit. And Jed Spence, he can do it. And even when it's not on, he will force it.
Yeah.
And he will get that ball into the space he sees.
I didn't realise also how quick he was a couple of times.
Oh,
Again, I know United have got no legs in that team, but really, really quick. Let's just touch on the game overall. Before we scored, 2 good saves from Vicario. The one from Garnacho when he sort of went with, people say, the wrong hand, went with his right hand and pushed it away. The Maddison goal was the same goal that we scored against them in the League Cup quarter-final, after probably about the same time when Solanke put the rebound in from the sub-keeper's parry. First time that Maddison has scored in consecutive appearances for us. Gave it a little bit back to Roy Keane. Was Roy Keane right? Has Maddison done enough?
I didn't 100% disagree with Roy Keane's comments. I think Maddison's exceptional. I think he's a brilliant, brilliant footballer. I do think sometimes he likes to play hero ball. It's all about him, and that can be an issue. But my days, when he's on it, he's one of the best 10s in the league. He can be amazing. And Spence got man of the match last night. I think you could have easily given it to Maddison. I think the only reason he probably didn't get it is because he didn't play a full 90. He allows us to build from deep. He's creative in the final third. His progressive passes are huge. Switches of play. He was unplayable yesterday. And to play a midfield 2 of Bruno Fernandes, who's an attacking mid, and he was asked to do an impossible job. And Casemiro may as well not have legs anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, that was like...
exactly that. I think it was a game in which if Maddison hadn't pulled the strings and hadn't stepped up, then you'd be asking serious questions. So I don't know that it was so much of a response to Roy Keane as the fact that he was always going to have the freedom of the park yesterday to do exactly what he wanted, and he did. But overall, I do understand where Keane is coming from, in that Maddison is now a senior player. He wants to be seen as the guy that takes on the responsibility. And when he plays well, Spurs will purr and play well. Yeah. But there are too many games where he doesn't take it by the scruff of the neck, where it is a tighter game, where you are being pressed harder, where you don't have as much space, and he's not quite making it happen. Yeah. And those are the games I think that Roy Keane is really talking about.
Yeah, and one tap-in isn't going to change Roy Keane's opinion or anyone's opinion. Maddison needs to do it over a long period of time.
Let's not discount that goal. Yeah. He was in space, reacting faster than everyone. He said it. Maddison said himself in an interview, "You're taught at 5 years old to follow it in."
Yeah,
people don't do it all the time. Strikers don't do it all the time. There's a reason that the best strikers in the world can score those goals as well as the spectacular. And Maddison was alive to it.
Yeah,
none of their back line was. Absolutely. None of our other players were. Someone had to do it, and he did it, and it was great.
Yeah, I thought Maddison had a good game. And he's another one, we spoke about Ange and what Ange needs to do between now and the end of the season. I think Maddison, between now and the end of the season, needs to play at a very consistent level and become the man, because he should be the man. He is very clearly our most talented natural footballer in the squad. And if he's going to play well, then we've got a very good chance in any game that we play. I think it was Jake Sanders said some time ago that if Spurs are losing games and Maddison isn't in the team, then there's a big problem. There's got to be questions asked. Overall, yesterday, I didn't think it was a great performance. I thought it was an okay performance. I thought it looked like I wasn't there, as I say, but it looked like we mostly controlled the game, had them mostly at arm's length. I don't think we created enough to be able to say that we were comfortable. And we still gave up easy chances.
Yeah, most of United's chances came from sloppiness from us.
Yeah.
We're still trying to play out from the back, which is something I don't like anyway. A lot of clubs do it. No, but when was the last time you saw us really play out and go, oh, okay, we've broken this line, and suddenly we're out? Most of the time yesterday, we spent playing the ball down the line and giving the ball away. I know we can't really go long because is Tell going to hold up? He's not Solanke. I get that, but then there must be another way.
For a lot of the game, I was really happy because we had settled possession. I thought we had really good settled possession. There were, for a large portion of the match, and I think probably until the last 20 minutes, our possession maybe had been around 70%. It ended about 56%. But we needed, I've been saying for ages, we need that calm possession game to have energy and to protect our players. But yeah, the problem was we didn't create a huge amount of that. We didn't create enough with that. And we had 2.2 XG. Maddison's goal was about 1, given where he was.
Yeah.
To Man U's 1.5. It didn't feel
I was
like
surprised
that.
Man United's 1.5 was so low. You look at the Xerxes chance,
Yeah.
Garnacho's chance in the first half, which was,
how he's not scored.
How he scored, yeah, for sure, but how he's not even hit the target.
Yeah.
He's lifted that so high, and he had a one-on-one in the second half.
Yeah.
Someone's just made a point here on the group. It's gone because Anne Smith is getting right in on the comments.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anne. Not be able to get to all of these, but somebody said we created almost chances.
More importantly, somebody said, "Someone get Gary a beer." Thank you, Louis. I appreciate that. Because I was going to call James, but I didn't quite know how to
interrupt. I think it was TJ
Yeah.
Romani who is on Last Word on Spurs said Tell could have had 6 or 7. I mean, no.
No.
He had 6 or 7 chances. One in the second half, which Kulu sort of deflected towards and made it harder. For me, was his best chance. It was a really good shot in the first half that you expect Onana to save, but it was a nice touch, a nice strike.
There was a terrible save from Onana.
Which one? The one? No.
Oh, sorry, the goal.
Oh, no, not the goal.
Oh, right, sorry.
No, he had a save that he pushed round.
Yeah.
Cutback to Tell.
Yeah.
His Tell's movement and positioning.
I think we
really,
did control the game for the most part, but I think, this might not be popular, but I think a better team, whether it be a better United team with more bodies or just a better football team, would probably have got something out of that game.
It did make a difference, though, having Vicario back. And as much as I think we all fell in love with Kinski very quickly, particularly off the back of...
Quickly, and that's not criticism. He's
No,
going to be a really good
He's going to be a
goalkeeper.
very good keeper, and particularly off the back of his debut against Liverpool, we won 1-0.
Yeah, it was great.
It was very easy to sort of fall in love with Kinski, but you see Vicario come back, and there were a couple of saves. I don't think Kinski saves that one that Vicario did, for example.
No.
And it does. He came back and looked assured straight away. But it was noticeable that corners were going in under the bar straight away.
Yeah. I'm definitely more confident with Kinski from corners, but I will say Vicario is probably one of the best shot stoppers in world football.
Yeah,
Is
great,
he? Statistically?
So I saw a stat. I think it was either on Twitter or Blue Sky the other day that Vicario is in the Premier League.
Thank you.
Was within the top 3 of XG prevented, whilst being injured for 2 months.
Right.
Like his shot stopping is exceptional.
Yeah.
He's so quick to react to everything. He's
very quick.
He's a spring.
Yeah.
And he really filled me with confidence. His ball playing is definitely not as extravagant as Kinski, but he's comfortable and can do it.
Yeah.
It's the corners that are always the worry. His command of his box like that, but for that shot stopping ability, you can have a couple flaws.
The one from Garnacho in the second half with his strong right hand was great. Just a couple of things before we come to Jon Mackenzie. Tell, I thought we should talk about him very briefly. Raw, energetic, worked hard, makes good runs in behind, good runs in the box, knows when to move out to the edge of the box, knows when to run across his man. No problem with that. Just a bit raw. Probably needs
Really raw.
refining.
Exactly. I was really happy with him for the most part. I mean, I'm really excited by him as a player. I think you can see the promise there.
Is he a centre forward?
I think this is going to be the problem with Tell. I was just thinking this. I think that Tell's career may be defined by the fact that he doesn't have a defined position. I think he's going to be one of those players where you will always ask the question, not in the way of Son, who is not a centre forward.
Ollie would tell you he's not a winger.
But I think with Tell,
he's not a dribbling.
but I think with Tell, like I think his career is just going to be. Do you know what? If we do end up buying him for 50 million or whatever, I think he's a guy that you're like, great, we've got him in the squad, and every week he'll either play left wing, right wing, or up front.
Yeah.
Great, fine, don't mind.
Yeah.
I could see him being a striker, but I could also see him being an inside left forward, like Son was almost his entire career. He had 7 shots yesterday, and I went back through because he had 7 shots. A couple of times you're like, hey, he probably shouldn't shoot there, but he creates shots for himself. How many shots per game do you think Solanke averages?
2 or 3.
2.2.
Yeah.
When at Bournemouth, it wasn't much higher. It was 2.9.
He needs the chances created for him,
Yes.
is what you're saying.
Tell in the Bundesliga last season averaged over nearly 5 shots a game, and last night he had 7. He will make.
But he was
shots.
playing for Bayern
He's
Munich.
tweeted.
Yes, he was, but he had 7 shots last night, and he will create those shots.
He said on
himself.
Instagram or Twitter, wherever he is, he said, I'd rather be 0 for 30. I can't remember what I don't mind being 0 for 30. He's like, I'll keep shooting.
Yeah.
Oh, it's that like basketball thing that's like, you know, if you've done like 2 for 5 and you've stopped trying, and it's some like
Okay, but
weird.
I'm not sure
No,
about
but you're
0 for
right.
30.
He's gonna take it on. He's gonna keep trying, and he's got the ability.
Yeah.
I don't think he's the cleanest striker of a ball.
No, he's not. But again, he just needs refining.
If you look at back at some of his Bayern chances and goals, he can absolutely
He can,
leather it.
really
And normally
can.
his connection's really good. So
Right.
to be honest, I was quite surprised at some of his like quite weak shots.
I think he was
yesterday.
excited.
Snatched a bit.
Someone said on our comments, he maybe tried a little bit too hard. But look, that was his debut in the Premier League. No, obviously, social media, people tell you, whoa, why are you going to spend 50 million on that? Let's just wait and see.
I just
think
like
there's
how
a player
he
there.
moves as well. He looks like it's really hard to quantify. And I said this to my friends in a group chat. I was like, I don't know what it is, but he moves like a world-class player. Like
That's a good point.
the way he just carries himself and he moves about the pitch and his confidence, his belief.
And he's definitely got the physicality
Yeah.
for the Premier League. He's a bigger lad than I thought he was. When he was at Bayern Munich, I had the impression he was, small, quick. He's actually big bloke, isn't he?
Yeah, he's tall.
Right, before we come to John, who's going to join us in
Dan,
a minute. We're going to come back. We'll come back to
Okay.
this. We'll come back to this. Just some stats from yesterday's games. Our first home league win since November, 105 days. 2 Premier League wins in a row for the first time since September, which was also Brentford and Man United.
How weird is that?
I know.
Maybe Ange just has teams that he beats.
First consecutive Premier League
have
clean
more
sheet. First consecutive clean sheets in the league since October 2023. Fulham and Luton. Third time we've done that under Ange. We've never kept 3 in a row under Ange. Last time was May 2022. First time we've beaten Man United 3 times in a season since 1990. Here's one that I looked up sadly in the car on the way home. I wasn't driving. First time we've beaten Man United in the same season without conceding for the first time in our history.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and the last one, a positive Ange stat from me. Ange is the 4th manager to remain unbeaten in his first 4 Premier League matches against Manchester United after Ruud Gullit, Unai Emery, and Nuno Espirito Santo.
So when was the last time we beat United 3 times in a season?
89-90.
89-90.
Yeah.
So does all of this stack up to them beating us in the Europa League final?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if our guest is here. James, is our guest here? All right.
Oh great. We'll keep. So let's chat dance.
Danso. Again, someone mentioned earlier in the comments about Romero's line-breaking passes. I think Danso, less so yesterday, but against Villa, he was certainly trying.
Yeah.
He is physically very strong, very quick. I know people I always talk about Kevin Wimmer, who I didn't think was that good. I remember when he made his debut, social media was awash with how wonderful he is. I was like the eye test will tell, and you don't. We did it with Kinski. I don't think he's anywhere as good as he thought he was after Liverpool. So you don't want to get too excited. This looks like a proper centre-half who just wants to defend, can defend. He's also prepared to go forward. A little bit risky at times. Maybe that's just the way we play, mate. But that's a good centre-half. I looked at that guy and I was like, that's a proper centre-half.
Yeah. He's a centre-half that, as you say, wants to defend. I think Soul Sniper Gaming just picking me up on United will not be in the Europa Cup final. I agree with you. I don't think they'll be in the. I mean, they're a poor team, United. I was being facetious, Soul Sniper Gaming. I don't think United will be in the Europa League final. I think we will be. It won't be against United. And if it was against United, I'd feel very confident. Going back to Danso, I've been impressed with him. Yeah. He looks like a very, very good, solid signing. And I do wonder if come the summer, it comes a question with somebody like Dragushin as to whether you move him on. You've got Danso, you buy your left centre back, and then you've got, if Romero stays, and there's talk actually about a new contract for Romero at this point, which is interesting to read. But let's say Romero stays, and you go into next season with Romero, Van de Ven, Danso, plus new left centre back.
That's exciting. Like,
that's good.
You talked about it towards the end of this season being potentially a... what's the word I'm looking for here? He's almost Is he auditioning for his job again? If he can get all these players back, it's exciting with those players, whether it's next season or this season.
But he needs to keep them fit.
Danzo, you say he's a proper defender, but I just really like that he's progressive. He's good on the ball, and he'll also dribble. Like he likes to drive up the pitch.
Yeah.
And he made a recovery run yesterday where I was like,
towards the end.
Van de Ven back.
Right. Enough of you, James. We've got Jon Mackenzie here. Can you hear us?
I can't really hear you guys.
Oh, you can't hear us. Can you hear me, John? Hello, hello, hello.
That's better, yeah.
Right. Maybe I just should have spoken more. John, thank you so much for joining us again. It's your hat trick. No hat trick ball, but it's your hat trick. It's your third appearance on An Echo of Glory. I have to say, the last two times you've come on, we on the back of a defeat, so we are in a better mood today. Beating United, I think you came on, we lost to Newcastle this season, Fulham the season before, so delighted to have you on after a win. You in a glorious position, you told me earlier, of re-watching Tottenham Hotspur 1, Manchester United 0. Feel sorry for you there. Before we get into Ange overall, just your thoughts on yesterday's game.
Yeah, it was an interesting fixture between two teams who I think have got a lot to play for this season in terms of having to make a change at this sort of period of the season. So with that context in mind, the game was, I thought, quite sloppy for long periods.
Yeah.
And I think in the second half in particular, Spurs didn't want to cede too much space, and so allowed the game to become quite transitional in a bid to hold on to the 1-0 lead. And so, yeah, the second half in particular became quite open, I thought. But the first half, I think Spurs controlled it for on and off long periods, but then were open at times at the back and looked in danger of conceding as well. So a really tricky game to really get your teeth into in many respects.
Yeah, we've just been saying that very same stuff, really. Overall, then, the Ange project, you mentioned in your most recent analysis, which I think was just after Villa, injuries have certainly affected our press, which is such a key component of Ange ball. But actually, teams are now playing through us easier than the start of the season. How much of an excuse do you think injuries are? And overall, where does that leave Ange? How sustainable at the moment is this?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, because I think that what has happened in the Spurs fan base is a sort of opening out of different positions. On the one side, people using the injuries as an excuse to blame the press for not working, and then on the other side, people arguing that, well, obviously the injuries are caused by the intensity of the press, and as a result, then I think that it's very hard to sort of get any kind of starting position in any debate about whether or not the press is good or bad. In part, that's because pressing is a tricky aspect of football to get your head around, because a lot of the time, every team out of possession has weaknesses, and the whole idea of a good press is a press which allows you to overcome the weaknesses in your system in the most functional way. So it's tricky talking about Spurs pressing, I think, because on the one hand, at the beginning of the season, the press largely worked, and it was, the intensity of the press actually papered over some of the cracks of the structure. But then the question is, well, does that make it a bad press which is being papered over, or is it a good press because it doesn't give up any kind of space or attacking advantages to the opposition? And it's a tricky one. So I think that's why the question of the injuries is so important, because if you can prove in some way that the press is unsustainable from the point of view of injuries, then you can make an argument that it's not good enough as a press, because your press has to be good enough for 50 games of a season, not just the first 10, 15 games of a season. At the same time, there isn't really that evidence there, I don't think. Like, there's no drop-down, drag-out argument where you could be like, the press is causing these problems. And so there's going to be a lot of people who are not going to accept that the intensity of the press has led to the injury crisis. I guess it's getting to a point where it's hard to argue against that. And, if it happened again next season and there was the same drop-off midway through the season, I think it would be very hard to argue that there isn't some kind of correlation. But at the same time, I think my position on the pressing has always been that, it's structurally problematic. There's problems with the press, which I think are there. And you can only get away with that if your players are able to be fully intense and are able to solve problems as they go. And clearly that's not happening at the moment. It's not happening as much when your first team players aren't in there. And I think for me, that's a worrying sign, because it suggests that you have to have your players performing to the best of their ability all the time in order for the press to function. So, the question is whether or not you can fix those problems easily or not without the whole project collapsing. And my argument from the beginning has always been, actually, there's some simple fixes you could make here that would result in, the press still being effective and still producing turnovers in high areas, which I think has been actually a fairly good way of you guys producing chances without actually having to be as intense as it is all the time.
Is it too easy? And please tell me if so, because I'm not, I'm a stats guy, I'm not a tactics guy. I think there's a difference. Just to say, for me to sit here and say, it's not Wraith Rovers, it's not St Johnstone. Is it too simple to say that?
I mean, it's an easy argument to make, but at the same time, I think that there is value to that kind of argument for a number of reasons. That, on the one hand, when Postecoglou was in Scotland, his teams dominated possession. So they were having to possess the ball for much longer periods of time. So you can get away with, I would say, having an intense form of press when you're, largely going to be holding onto the ball with possession. And then on top of that, you're playing against players who aren't going to be able to, find the weaknesses in your pressing system at the same time. So it's absolutely a fair criticism to say this press maybe worked elsewhere. Is it fit for purpose in the Premier League? And I did a long thread. This was even before Postecoglou was linked to Spurs. This was when he was being linked to other Premier League sides, saying that I had worries about how the press would scale up to the elite level. We obviously had the evidence of Celtic playing against European sides where I think the press was often found out. Add on top of that the fact that then there is the intensity needed to actually paper over some of those cracks, and then the question is whether or not you can play that amount of time out of possession with that level of intensity in order to fix the problems in your press. So I don't want to just sit here and say the press is not fit for purpose, but I think the press is fit for purpose. I think that all presses that you can actually get to work, in some sense, are fit for purpose. But the question isn't, can this work for 90 minutes? It's, as we said before, can this work for a 50-game season? And that's what I'm interested in as a tactical analyst. How do you maybe moderate this press a little bit so that it's not just either on or off, right? Which is how it feels at the moment. You either go and everyone goes and you go all the time, or you sit deep and you don't put pressure on at all.
I think you're 100% right. And a lot of the concerns that I have is this sustainable for a 50, 60 game season, particularly when you start looking at the overall running stats, which we are, as we've discussed with the press, the most intense team off the ball. We're also the most intense team on the ball. And there's been some great stats and graphs around that. But what concerns me is the stat that when we run more than the opposition, we win 53% of our games. When the opposition runs more than us, we lose 91% of games. There's a very big disparity there. And that's got to be a huge concern tactically and in terms of sustainability, no?
I think so. Yeah, I think, and again, this comes back to what I was saying before, that you have to distinguish between the amount of intensity you need for a press to work and the structure of that press. And I think there does come a point where if you're relying on intensity for your press to work, then it becomes an issue. Not only because it will cause, I think, an undue amount of intensity to make that press work over a long period of time, but also, as we've said, once that intensity drops off, suddenly the press doesn't look as functional as it was anymore. I think it is worth saying that the data that's been put out regarding the intensity of sprints and pressing for Spurs this season, that the argument is made that, well, it's not like a massive magnitude bigger than what the rest of the teams are doing, but my argument has always been Spurs are an outlier. They are running more with and without the ball. And I think as soon as you're in that sort of scenario where you're doing something out with what everyone else in the league is doing, I already have alarm bells going, being like, why is everyone else not running with this kind of intensity? If you could get away with playing at that intensity with a bigger depth of squad, why are the teams that have, that depth of squad that could allow them to run that much doing it as well? So I often flip the argument back on its head, because there's a lot of people out there who will say, well, if we had a depth of squad and we had all of our players from injury, then this would be a functional way of playing football out of possession, and in possession, of course, as you mentioned. But for me, that's always the way that I will initially think, is that, well, if it was functional and you could get away with being this intense, surely every team would be doing it, because it gives you a massive advantage.
Let me ask you very quickly. When teams are running more than us, and we are then losing 90% of the games that teams are losing more than that teams are running more than us, what's the tactical reason for that? What are we not doing when teams are running more than us that says we're getting beat?
You put me on the spot.
Oh, sorry, I put you on the spot. Yeah, I have put you on the spot. But I'm interested in just generally, I have put you on the spot, but from your observations, a team runs more than us, works harder than us. It's not always the way that a team should lose 90% of games in which that happens. So putting you on the spot, what is going on with us in that scenario?
I think a lot of it just comes down to the fact that if your press requires you to cover a lot of distance, which is why I think there's a lot of intensity in your pressing, and you aren't able to make those distances, then your press is going to be open.
Gaps,
and the opposition are just going to be able to play through you. Right?
We're 2 passes away. We're 2 passes away from being cut open. Sometimes even 1 pass.
But then, is there not? Do you think? And again, putting you on the spot, a bit of a naivety in the way that we're being coached, in the sense that we need to learn to sit in sometimes. We need to learn to sit in, defend, grind it out, and hit a team on the break.
Like a Brentford away?
Sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, the Brentford away game is interesting because I think that's not a particularly sustainable way of playing either, even though you got the win in that game.
Yeah.
For me, it's about moderation. It's you don't need to go in utter intensity the whole time. So one of the things that I've pointed out to a lot of people online is that one of the things that really winds me up about the press is that there's times when your press, so you'll be working the opposition. They'll play the ball back to their back line or goalkeeper, and you'll jump with your front 3, for example. The goal that Villa scored right at the beginning of that game, a great example of this. So press functionally works. You force the opposition back, but then you have Heung-min Son pressing one centre back. You have Mikey Moore on the other side pressing the other centre back. They have a fullback on the far side who isn't going to get marked because Pedro Porro is the marking responsibility there, and he's still in his deep first line phase. So he's got to jump 40, 50 yards up to get to that player. Yeah. They've also got the goalkeeper and another player running into their own half. So you're talking 2 Spurs players pressing 4 or 5 Villa players in their own half with space. In the Premier League, you are not going to get away with that because those players are just going to play around you. And again, to come back to what Johnny was saying before, in the Scottish Premier League, that is going to probably result in the goalkeeper going long. But in this, in at this level, that is not going to happen. They're going to play it around. They're going to find the spare player, and they're going to then start skewering your press. The issue there is not the intensity of the press necessarily. It's the lack of efficiency of the press, which is it's never going to be efficient. You're never going to win the ball in that scenario, or even necessarily cause a turnover, I don't think, apart from maybe every once in a while. And so what you've got then is you've got 2 or 3 players. So you've got Son jumping onto the centre back and then following through to the goalkeeper. That's a 40, 50 yard sprint. And this is something that doesn't get talked about when people are talking about the sprints, because they'll say, oh, well, other teams are also doing a lot of sprinting. And you're like, well, yeah, but what kind of intensity for the sprint? How long is the sprint? Is the sprint actually going to be rewarded by having some kind of turnover at some point, so we can talk about efficiency? And there's lots of scenarios. It happens in every Spurs game. I can show you clips from the Man United game the weekend where that was happening, where you've got 2 players pressing against 5 opposition players in space in their own half. They're just going to play through you. And so again, my issue there is, okay, have triggers. The players should be able to look at that scenario and say it's better for us not to press here than it is to go long, especially against a team like Manchester United, who actually, if you watch back the Liverpool game that Man United played in, Liverpool were just happy to let them have the ball deep because they weren't progressing it at all. You're almost more likely to allow them to produce ball progression by pressing them, forcing them going long, and then winning second balls. So for me, a lot of this comes down to making your press more moderate, because the press at the beginning of the season was very good. It was producing decent underlying numbers, and you could make the argument that Spurs were one of the better pressing teams in the league. It hasn't seemed to have been sustainable, I suspect, because of the intensity of it. But also, I think that you moderate the press a little bit, and you don't get much of a drop off. You just become more discerning about when to go, the moments when those pressing triggers happen, and you're still getting the level of intensity at the right moments that can force the turnovers. But you're also conserving energy because you're not going every time, and also you're just making your players smarter. Your 100%. Players will then recognise when to go, and there'll be a level of then interpretation coming into your press, whereby the players are actually deciding for themselves rather than having this seemingly overarching mandate, which is we go all the time. We go. Starting introducing a little bit more of that sort of moderation and thoughtfulness about the press, I think, would keep the press largely at the same kind of level of efficiency without the same kind of level of energy. I just quickly before I finish on this, but I looked, a few Spurs fans were saying to me online again, what about Newcastle? Because Newcastle are a great example of a team who press intensely. And I dug through the data, and what I found there is that actually what Newcastle are much better at than Spurs is that level of moderation and interpretation. They have much less time spent in intense high pressing, and in fact across every phase of play, high, middle, low pressure, they're putting in much less intensity, but they were producing, this season at least, the same sort of level of in fact a greater level of efficiency, so producing more efficient pressing but with less pressing actions. And that's just a great example, I think, of being able to work a scenario where you're actually still going to be efficient in certain high pressing phases like Newcastle are, but then Newcastle, what they do so well is they know when to drop back into a mid block and to just accept the opposition are going to have the ball for a time. You then have those triggers on backwards passes or miscontrolled touches. Those are the triggers for you to go high. You're going to be much more likely to get anything out of those sorts of pressing moments. And I think if you can start introducing that into the Spurs press, you'll probably see much better effects from it.
So I've got two questions. One, can we start the campaign to get you as Spurs' pressing coach? And the second would be, there's someone in our chat has asked, who you mentioned Newcastle, but who are the best who are doing it right now? Who could we take notes from on a better out of possession structure?
That's a loaded question, so I know where you want to go with this, I think.
Bournemouth.
Well, no, because actually my opinion on Iraola is it was just more of the same, but maybe we can get to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few things here. I mean, I'm aware that this is a Spurs podcast, so I don't want to praise Arsenal too much. But I think Arsenal over the last few seasons have been one of the best pressing coach.
We'll move on from that. Thanks. Go on. No, seriously, do go on.
But I think the example of Arsenal is interesting because I think in previous seasons they've been much more intense in their pressing and they've had to dial it back in more recent seasons. Last season, I think because actually teams were working out that the way that they press, you can actually increase the distances that they have to cover. Because a lot of Arsenal's pressing is based around these sort of hybrid systems where you'll have a player that's sort of covering two marking responsibilities, and their job is to jump from one to the other depending on how the phase of play is opening out. And teams realise, well, if Bukayo Saka is between one of the centre backs and the fullback, if you can increase the distance between those two players, it makes it harder for him to actually be able to monitor both players at once. So last season, we saw that happening a little bit more in the second half of the season. So I think as a result of that, they had to actually dial back their pressing a little bit because of that. But yeah, so that's an example of a team who I think are still very, very good out of possession without necessarily having to rely on the intensity to make their pressing good. You mentioned Iraola. Iraola, yeah, I mean, a team where they definitely have the sort of intense pressing mandate. That's how they're going to find their upside. They're able to recruit players who have that out of possession upside, and then work situations where they're creating chaotic game states, but they're better prepared than the opponent in theory to be able to deal with those chaotic game states. So very much about destabilizing the opposition's build up, winning the ball back, but then having the sort of ability to cause problems from those moments when they cause turnovers. And look, yeah, it's great, and I'm a massive fan of Iraola. I do question the ceiling of that kind of approach. In fact, before I get to that, it's worth saying I also think that they are much better at the triggers side of things. So you will very rarely see an Iraola team pressing up onto the goalkeeper when they have the ball all the time. There's certain phases where they will do that, and again, it's trigger based. So you make the decision on the basis of whether or not you think there's any value to pressing high onto the goalkeeper at that point. But a lot of the time, you'll see just the striker sort of sitting off the goalkeeper, covering one of the centre backs, the far side centre back, and then the players behind them ready to jump should the play develop. You won't often see them just going hell for leather from the off. It's a much more considered and pressing approach. But yeah, again, I think that the reason why Iraola approaches the game in that way is because he recognizes that if he were to try and compete with the elite sides playing quote unquote elite football, whatever that means now, and the definition of elite football is becoming ever more I guess complicated by the day, but he realizes that if he were to compete on that level, he doesn't have the technical players to be able to do that, right? So he's finding his edge by doing this other approach. You could argue that Postecoglou is doing a similar thing, because I think at the beginning of the season, a lot of Spurs' best chances came from provoking high turnovers by pressing intensely. But I think, as we've seen, in the long run, that hasn't really paid out for them. And I think the issue now is, the questions are being raised about whether or not they are creating enough from open play, which, I think when you are a team who have pretensions of getting into the Champions League spots on a regular basis, I think you probably have to make sure that your in possession approach is as sustainable as your out of possession approach as well.
I thought our in possession chance creation, to be honest, without the press, has been pretty poor overall. Compared, like, it seems like if we don't have a turnover, we don't create a chance. Correct. High turnover. So I've always been really worried about the in possession creation.
Yeah, I think especially this season, there has been a fallback into, well, we've got to be more intense in the press because that's where our chances are coming from. And the low block breaking down has not proven to be as dangerous as people hoped it would be with Postecoglou, despite the fact that in the SPFL he was getting pretty good results from that. But yeah, and again, this raises other questions. I mean, we've talked mainly about the out possession stuff, but the in possession stuff, I think, is there to be talked about. Whether or not these positional rotations that I think proved to be fairly functional last season. I just don't think that they are as functional as they have been. Teams are finding ways of dealing with those positional rotations, and I think there's an extent to which you could argue that there's a level of gimmickry to them, because essentially what's happening is like Jed Spence switches places with James Maddison. You end up with roughly the same structure, but just different players in those positions. And I think at first teams were like, oh, how do we deal with this? And now I think more and more teams are just sort of they have their responses to that, and I just don't think that those rotations cause enough damage. And I've been on here every time talked about two-way wingers who can go both ways against fullbacks, and part of the reason why I think Postecoglou's system requires that is because the system itself doesn't generate as much attacking upside as it may be purported to, and so you have to rely on getting those players into 1v1 matchups where you've got a talent advantage, and you can create that attacking upside through just having better players, right? So I do think there are questions to be asked about the in possession side of things as well. But again, all of this is complexified by the fact that injuries have meant it's probably unfair to judge the both in possession and out of possession. But yeah, again, that argument I think becomes weaker if you can make the further argument that it's because the intensity the game requires is reducing the level of players that you have at your disposal at any one time, right? So it is a very complicated argument, and I think I fall on a particular side of it. I think there's lots of smart people who fall on the other side of that argument as well. So I don't want to sit here sounding as though I'm sort of pontificating on it. But yeah, it's my sense of it, and particularly with the out of possession approach, like whatever little expertise I have is more in the out of possession phase. And for me, I read the press, I watch a lot of tapes, a lot of tape, and I look at that press and I think this is a naive press in the context of elite pressing at the highest level in the modern game. And that's all I can say really. Whether or not that's then causing these further injuries is up for debate, but even without that, I think there are better ways of pressing than Spurs currently are pressing.
John, it's been amazing. I'm going to ask you one more question. Just on our comments, we've had a few people pointing out how you have massively raised the IQ of the panel. Absolutely right. It's brilliant to talk to you. I want to ask you one final thing, John. I've been a bit of an Ange skeptic for quite a while. I would love nothing more than to be celebrating in Bilbao, having won the Europa League. But more than that, I'd love nothing more in 2 years' time for him to still be here and it's be working. I don't want another manager sacked. I'd love this to work, but I'm sceptical. Do you think it can? And if it can, he would have to have adapted. And do you think he will adapt? And do you think he can adapt?
Yeah, and I think that's where the argument stands and falls, right? And this was when I was talking about Postecoglou arriving in the Premier League. A lot of my concerns were about scalability. By which I mean, like, how do you take this system which works in these other leagues and then you scale it up for the Premier League? Now, a lot of people consider that to be a sort of fairly snobbish way of looking at things, but I think that's the reality. Like the Premier League is so tactically advanced now. All of the best managers in the world want to be there, and many of the best managers in the world are there. And as a result, it's just completely unforgiving from a tactical point of view. You get maybe 6 months grace with your tactical ideas, at which point all of the analysts have sort of taken them to pieces, and the coaches have found ways of causing problems to them.
We didn't get 6 months. I don't think we had 6 months, John. I think we were found out.
10 games.
I do. I think the 10 games after that, Gary Neal got sacked and went on M&F and was like, "This is how you beat Ange Postecoglou."
Yeah. And look, I think that the way that you get around this, I think there's two things. In possession, you need to have a level of complexity to your play, by which I mean you can't just simply have a sort of one-to-one mapping of your ideas onto the pitch, because if you do that, if a team can look at you and say, in this phase your players are always going to do this, it's super easy to solve that. So you need to have a level of complexity in your possession play. Out of possession, though, you need, I think, a level of simplicity, which is you want to reduce the amount of complexity as much as possible whilst retaining the ability to stop the opponent. And I think on both of those counts, you could argue that the Postecoglou hasn't matched up to expectations. In terms of whether or not he will do that, it's hard to know, because I think so much of his approach is based around this idea that there's a level of value in being able to motivate people through the sheer belief in your own ideas. And I think he's made a big part of, and I think that there's an extent to which that is true. The best coaches are the coaches who can get their players to run through fire for them, and it's clear that Postecoglou has retained the belief of his players. So that's a really important aspect of coaching. It's a very hard aspect of any human interactions to be able to generate yourself. So in that respect, I think he deserves praise. But at the same time, if that comes at the detriment of being able to adapt your ideas, then I think you're on a hiding to nothing. The best coaches in the Premier League are always the coaches who adapt. Pep Guardiola is the adaptive coach par excellence. People like to talk about him as a highfalutin idealist because his big picture view of how you play the game hasn't really changed since he started. But within his high idealism, there's a huge amount of space for flexibility, and he constantly adjusts the way that his team are playing. The same is true of, we talked about Arteta. If you chart Arteta's out of possession approach over the last 5 seasons, every season it's different. They change it every year. They recognise the weaknesses, and you see the tweaks and the fixes to that as time goes by.
But I think Jurgen Klopp as well. Obviously not in the Premier League now, but started and got picked apart for his gegenpressing and all of that. But he adapted and he got there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what that's what the best coaches do. And so I think I'm not convinced that Postecoglou will make those changes. I think that he could make those changes. I think he is a fantastic coach, a fantastic manager, and I would love to see him succeed as well.
Do you think that? Because a fantastic coach and a fantastic manager is somebody, as you say, should adapt, recognise the weaknesses, and therefore get the best in a given situation. If you think that he's not going to do that, is he a fantastic coach and manager?
I think that part of the problem here is that he's not really had to do that at this level before now. And so I think I give him a little bit of grace on that because, his approach has worked everywhere else he's gone. So I think it's a difficult process for him to go through as well. Not least because, we can talk about the injuries all we want, but there's plenty of other teams in the Premier League who are struggling with injuries because the level of intensity that's required, the level of physicality in the league has gone up in recent years. So there's an extent to which there's a lot of coaches who've maybe miscast the amount of physicality that they need to have in a sort of season by season basis for their team. So I'm not going to judge him on that. And then with that in mind, let's say that he has slightly misjudged the amount of intensity that is okay or isn't okay. It's then very hard to judge him off the back of that and saying, well, he should have adapted earlier. He hasn't had a huge amount of time to adapt to that. So I'm willing to give him a grace period on that because I think it is tricky to come into this league and know how to deal with at the highest level. But yeah, I think that the jury is still very much out, and he is running out of time to be adaptive and make those changes. And you can have good coaches. Maybe this would be how I would respond to your initial point there. You can have good coaches who aren't going to function at the highest level with elite teams. There's plenty of coaches out there who do a very good job of coaching mid-level teams as well. And I think sometimes we dismiss those coaches because we think in terms of the Pep Guardiolas and we think in terms of the Jurgen Klopps. But these guys are generational guys who, arguably Pep Guardiola is the greatest coach that we've ever seen in the history of football, which is, it seems harsh to then judge everyone off the back of that. And I think Postecoglou's system has enough to recommend it that, maybe it isn't going to work in this instance, in this league, for this team. But I still think that there's value to what he has done, he's achieved in his career. And I still think that he's, there's plenty of things about his approach that I think are laudable.
Jon, it's been amazing to talk to you. I hope that your 4th appearance, we come on whenever it is into next season and we're talking about how he's adapted. And Ange's still here. We've not even won the Europa League, but we've adapted and we've moved on. I'd love to know how he's adapted rather than maybe we've had this conversation a couple of times, but it's always fascinating. Genuinely, I would love to talk about how Ange's changed his ways. Jon, thank you so much for joining us. Sorry I kept you longer than I said we would, but it's...
No, thank you.
It's really great
to talk
to you.
Thank you for having me.
No, a great hat-trick, a classic hat-trick, a perfect hat-trick. Jon, thank you so much and we'll speak to you soon.
Cheers, Jon.
Cheers, Jon. Thank you so much.
Cheers, brilliant.
All the best. Cheers.
Don't come much better than that.
Huh?
Don't come better than that on the tactics and stuff. And you know, we had a few comments in our. Pardon?
Still put today.
Nice.
No, it's going on. We had a few comments in our social media recently. You know, who are you guys? What right have you got to talk about it? I mean, a load of nonsense. So we get these guys on who. I'm a football statistician. It's very different to what Jon is looking at. I'll give you numbers like this is the first time Spurs have beaten Man United without conceding a goal for the first time in their history. Very different to what Jon and those guys do. I don't do that. I'll never. You like that stuff. You look into that stuff. You know these guys are.
Yeah, I try my best, but that's like I'm playing for Wrexham and he's messing.
You know, Callum has said in our comments, "Who is this guy? Is he a coach, a Premier League coach? I don't recognise his face." I mean, come on, that's very flippant. Like Jon, that's his job.
He's a tactical analyst.
He may one day get a job at a Premier League club.
He might have had. He's probably done work for clubs.
Well, they do. These guys,
common.
right? Exactly. These guys do work for Premier League clubs. So I don't have to say allegedly every time I mention the name of the Premier League. I'm safe to say some things.
For example, big Spurs tactics presence on Twitter. Nathan Clark has worked for clubs,
right? Okay,
and that is people like Jon and that they often get kind of put down for the fact they're not working for a club, but they have worked for clubs. People have left clubs to go work for publications to be tactical analysts. That is what happens, and really, really brilliant, honestly. And to be honest, he's made me think that Ange is rubbish out of possession, rubbish in possession, and he might have to go unless he changes it.
But that's interesting because I have to say, I think when we had Jon on after Newcastle, it was third or fourth game of the season. I wouldn't say I annoyed him, but I was in a mood that morning, and I was really. That was actually my real start of I've had enough of this guy. And I think he was just like, I think he was still a little bit on the fence. And, you know, it's been 4 months and a lot has almost happened since then, since September. It really has gone, the roller coaster really has gone down. Instead of going up and down, it's kind of gone down. And I think, I'm not saying I was right, but Jon has done his analysis and he's sort of come around. And I think we're now almost on the same page. Like again, I'm not saying I was right, but it just seems to have gone that way. And to listen to someone like Jon, I don't know how Ange can change or why it's happening. Yeah. But to hear, I'm just like, I just see it and I'm like, we're losing all the time. I don't know why. But for someone like Jon to come on and tell us why.
And to come with solutions.
Correct.
And I think something to give Ange some benefit of the doubt. Jon mentioned that these managers changing every season. Ange is always changing his backroom staff. We hired 2 new coaches in the summer, and one of them had experience with set pieces. Mm-hmm. Look, we're not the best set piece team in the league. We are so much better in attacking set pieces and defensive set pieces than last season. We've seen a change. He analyses the internal workings of his team and tries to make adjustments and changes. I think losing Chris Davis in the summer was probably really big. He's doing really well with Birmingham.
Yeah. Very well.
Really well. We sent a picture in the chat that could have been on the earlier segment. 70%, 74% win percentage there.
Yeah, they've got a massive budget.
And we all see him as stubborn and maybe naive, but in actuality, he is willing to change things and look at himself and look at their processes. And that's quite hard for people to do quite often.
Yeah, I just think.
But we need to see it now.
Oh, correct. And the players are coming back, and he's talked about that ad nauseum, rightly or wrongly. We've had the discussion about why the injuries have happened. Well, that's done now. The players are coming back. By the time we get to the Europa League round of 16, touch with no more fresh injuries. Arguably, the only one who could be out could be Dragusin. There will be 1 or 2 along the way. Yeah. Just hopefully it's not your serious 2-3 months like we've been having. We could get to whoever we play in that last 16 with a full set, really. Like I say, bar Dragusin. You just said it just before we came to Jon. It's time now to see it, because don't forget, like we've said, before all the injuries, we lost to Ipswich, we lost to Palace, we drew with Leicester, we were 2 up at Brighton and lost 4-2. So like I just said to Jon, if it changes and we go on and do well, you can all poke fun at me, go, we told you, we put up that graphic of Arteta and then we knew it was going to be right because it's the second season and blah, blah, blah.
My bite wants.
We all want that.
You can be angry.
But my argument back to that will be what I just said to Jon. I think Ange would have adapted, because I don't think what we've had before, even with the full squad, is going to be sustainable enough for him to still be successful in this job come the end of 2025.
But
that's my opinion.
But he has to adapt, because you're playing a game where the success of it is based on essentially running more than the opposition most of the time, in and out of possession. I found it interesting, Jon's point, that, you know, he finds our press naive, and those were his words, and we've often been, you know, picked up on using the word naive when it comes to Ange. But I've said a number of times here, and I'm not as in-depth as Jon is, but there are certain presses that drive me mad. The right winger pressing the centre-back. Why? What are you doing? It looks like a naive press. Yeah. So easy to play around. I don't understand.
The yards comment was something I've never thought about, which I found really interesting. The fact that we're asking players to press across 30, 50 yards when with triggers and a good structure, as you can make those intense sprints, and then that number still ticks up 1, 2, 3, 4.
100%.
But the yards are 10, 15, 20. And
so he's going to have to adapt for a number of reasons. And I think it is... I mean, I cannot see how there is not a correlation between the running yards and particularly that amount of running yards and the training in order to be able to carry that off. And the injuries.
Well, okay, so Bobby Dabby Boo has said on here, all those losses were after Europa League games. It's an interesting point. These are our results after Europa League games. Okay, after Karabag...
So quick, Johnny.
After Karabag, we did win 3-0 at Man United. It does go a little bit south, but who doesn't beat Man United? After Ferencváros, we lost at Brighton, 3-2. I think I said 4-2, but 3-2. After RZ, we lost to Palace. After Galatasaray, we lost to Ipswich. After Roma, we drew at home to Fulham. After Rangers, we won at Southampton, but the three of us could have been in Southampton that night. And after Hoffenheim, we lost to Leicester.
Yeah, but hang on about, like, you know...
Oh, I'm just
No.
Giving you the stats.
You raised a really important point on our group earlier, okay, which was about the frequency of games, the number of games, the fact that we had an additional 2 Europa League games this year.
And no winter break that was recently put into the league.
And they were all really, really valid points, as is the point that is raised that all of those defeats were post-Europa games. But then, this is my point to that, okay, was I actually agree. I think the frequency of games is way too much.
Yeah, the Championship gets brought up a lot with that, but the intensity is different. But different level.
The Premier League, the frequency of games is way too much. There needs to be more breaks. There needs to be fewer games. But the reality of it is, to the point about us losing after Europa, and your point, it's not as though we went into the season with that as a shock. We knew that was that's what it was going to be.
Yeah, you got.
And this comes back to the overarching point of you cannot just play a way which says run more than the opposition. Run.
Harry Redknapp, run around.
Like, you know, there's got to be. There's got to, and I know that it's not as simplistic as that. I realise, but that's essentially what we're doing. There's got to be a point where you're saying, do you know what, lads? Like, we are playing a huge number of games back to back. You know, Thursday, Sunday. This wasn't a shock to anybody. No. This wasn't a shock. And it comes back to, at the beginning of the season, I don't believe the squad is utilised in the way it should have been.
No, it wasn't.
I think mistakes were made with the Europa League squad, we've already discussed. And I think overarching all of that is the fact that if Ange is going to succeed, the press, as Jon rightly says, needs to become a lot more sophisticated, because at the moment it is naive, it is easy to pick apart, it's easy to see coming, it's easy to play around, and that's why the opposition is always 2 passes away from a goal. And if we were better with the triggers, more conservative in our energy, pressing from shorter distances, then actually you may not see the fatigue and the injuries that are coming in. And we may have been able to manage this a lot better.
And just talked a lot in his presses recently, and I think it's a good point, is that we haven't been training for 3 months. And a lot of teams will be very, very similar, but when there's a lack of squad available and it's the same 11 players, if you can rotate, some of those players are going to get true training sessions and not just recovery.
I think it's looked like we haven't been training. James for 3 months.
And funny that the United game, the press was, hey, look, yes, it's not perfect, but it was better than it has been. Yeah. And, you know, we...
I thought you were coming to kick us out, James.
I was afraid. I thought he was going to lump me. And the press was better than it definitely has been yesterday. Still, whether the overall structure of it is good or bad, that's just been answered. But it was better with a week's training and players available. And also the in possession, as we touched on as well, we're rubbish at creating chances. And I'm going to use that as my chance to be talk about Odebear and why I think he's amazing.
One
if
more
that's
thing,
okay.
I will come back to Odebear.
Yes.
A couple of people, whatever his name is, Gogafogo, and one other, Daniel Pincus, talked about Bournemouth's ground being smaller, and they did ask me to ask John, but I wanted to let John go. Oh, you look at the awful state of that beer.
Wow.
That is half.
That's like a float.
Half head, half beer.
You need
Enjoy
to buy
that,
a little
guys.
like sailing
I
boat,
asked for
James,
a
to put
half.
in the top.
I asked for a cheeky half, but that I'm not sure.
Look at that.
Not sure what that is. Cheers, James.
Anyway, look, Bournemouth Stadium is smaller, but they still go to Newcastle and press the shit out of Newcastle to win 4-0. So I didn't ask John, but it was a good point. But we have the beer that Gary deserves.
Will says, funny to see Gary less angry if John's validated my opinion. Two things on that. Number one, apparently John elevated the IQ of the panel. So if he's validated my opinion, then maybe people were not understanding what I was saying. But number two, no, I wasn't angry last week because our performances have actually been pretty... It's just the way that I am, but I actually genuinely have been pretty apathetic over the last sort of couple of weeks or months about where we are and how we're playing. So I'm resigned to the fact that we are going to play this silly method of football that clearly long term just isn't going to work. I was angry last week because somebody suggested that Spurs fans were entitled when I was disappointed with our current run and with bowing out of 2 cups, conceding 6 goals to no reply, barely having a shot on goal in all of that. And somebody said Spurs fans are entitled. That's what got my goat last week. That's what got me really
and it's
riled
fair,
up.
it's fair to get angry at because it's like, we're failing at meeting our expectations and what we should be doing. And if you're failing, that's bad and annoys you. It doesn't matter whether you're at the top or at the bottom.
I'm going to let you come to Odebear.
Yes.
I didn't want to go too big on this. I wasn't sure if I was going to mention it at all. But what you just said, we've had a bit of criticism in our comments last week about criticising Ange, and we're just a bunch of football fans who have been going to Spurs, myself since '87, you since similar '87. You're only 25 or something. I don't know. You've been supporting Spurs since we were quite good. Which is why we get John on, right? Is to provide the expertise. We say what we see. I may work in football, doesn't make me a tactico. I just give my opinion.
We give the layup, and he can dunk it.
He can dunk it.
No, but I think people came on saying, "Who are you to criticise Ange? What have you ever coached?
We're fans. I know you're allowed to
What have you ever
criticise.
coached?
That's my
What have you
right.
done?" At the end of the day, we're here with. I think you and I, certainly between us, I'd be surprised if we have missed across TV or live at the stadium, more than 10% of games as fans in the last 15 to 20 years. Plus. Right? Like plus. So, no, we are experts at being Tottenham fans. We know this club inside out and back to front.
Yeah.
We know who and what Tottenham Hotspur are. We're just here giving our opinions. You can agree with them, disagree with them.
I agree with Robert. Best Spurs podcast, hands down, foamy arse beers aside.
But it is a draft pint, and I doubt you're getting that on a lot of Spurs podcasts.
No, this is a draft pint, and they can be quite tricky to pull sometimes.
Right, before
I've got it at home.
we go, a very quick preview on Ipswich.
No, he wants to talk about.
No,
Odegaard.
I said before that.
Oh, okay.
James Robbins, you have a minute on Wilson Odebear.
Okay. So I'm not going to overhype him. He might not be our saviour, and that is fine.
Correct.
Bloody good player,
But
though.
why I
Yeah,
think
good player.
he is so promising is so City's dribbly wingers, they got Doku and Savino, and they will take players on and they will do the most and they'll get a cross in and they will create nothing. What really excites me about this player when we signed him and now that he's back is that he has played number 10. He's not just a winger.
Has he played 10?
Yeah.
He played so
Burnley
early.
fans said he's best through the middle.
So he progressed to play centrally a lot. So, yes, when he came on yesterday, he completed 2 or 3 dribbles, more than any of our other wingers
More
on
than
the pitch.
Son, yeah.
More than Son. Not Son's style, that's
Yeah,
fine,
yeah,
but it
okay.
is Odebear's.
You saying
But
you say
also-
more than Johnson? I'm shocked.
Not Johnson's style, but I think Odebear could unlock these guys a bit because, again, as I said earlier, having these dribblers across the pitch that can, beat a player one-on-one creates chaos. John said it as well. If, our in possession isn't fantastic, but, if you have someone that can destabilise another team, then you're going to create space and create chances.
Yep.
And then Odebear's ability as a 10 excites me because he's not just your dribbly winger that's going to dribble into nowhere, into no man's land. We had that with Lucas Moura forever. Dribble into a man. Frustrating as
Are you
anything.
telling me he's the new Stefan Dalmat?
That might be a bit before.
I love Stefan Dalmat.
I called that actually when I first saw him.
Did
I said,
you?
right at the beginning of the season, I said he's got a bit of the Dalmats about him.
So my excitement is about him is that, he'll be able to dribble his man, but actually create something.
100%.
Because he's heads up when he's dribbling, his heads up, he's looking for options. and he's 19. He got and wingers peak young.
I only gave him a minute.
It's an interesting point, right? Because Jake Sanders, before the season started, said if he could pick out a criticism of this squad, it is that we don't have enough forward players who retain the ball and actually beat a man and pull a team out of possession. And he said it absolutely. And I go back to it because I'd love to be the one that said it, but he actually said it, and I agreed with it entirely. He articulated it beautifully at the beginning of this season, and he said, "I think that is going to be a problem," and it has been, because when you've got Son and Johnson on the wings, the ball's not sticking anywhere, right? But I do think when you've got...
It's also quite straight lines.
Yeah. Exactly that, right? They want it in behind, you know how they're going to play, and if you can stop that. But when you've got, let's say, I would quite like to see, and I know you're talking about Odebear in the 10, I would actually quite like to see Odebear on the left, Maddison in the middle.
I'm just saying that ability to be a 10.
But I would like to see Odebear on the left, Maddison in the middle, and Kulusevski on the right. Then you've got 3 real ball retentions. Any one of them can beat a man at any time or play a pass. And I think it opens everything up a tremendous amount more.
There was a couple of moments in the game yesterday where we had a break, which included Son, Tell and Johnson. And it came to nothing. And to be honest, on another day, I think Johnson a bit rusty. I think that actually comes off.
Yeah.
But it was quite disappointing. Just someone with a bit more IQ to do that would be great. And I think Odebear could be, if he develops as we expect. I'm not going to say that at the end of the season he's going to have 5-6 assists. You know, he might play 390s. He's had hamstring surgery. We need to give him time. But I am so excited for him, and it's an example of the type of player I'm glad we scouted. I'm glad we signed, and I hope we find more.
100%. We've got an interesting thing going on here at the minute, because I think James has gone somewhere, and so the camera's just on you. So do you want? Oh, there it is. Oh, James, I wish you hadn't done it. I was about to ask. I was about to ask you to do a song and a dance. Like, what the camera's on.
Well, I thought I could. All right, quickly on to Ipswich Town. We don't have an Ipswich Town guest. Last time we had Matt Holland on, but we've gone for more of a Spurs chat today with John. Ipswich Town, very strangely, a bogey team for Tottenham Hotspur. Of all the teams, for Spurs to have a bogey team. They have won the last 3 against us. No, 4 now, because this actually doesn't include this season. We've lost our last 4 games against Ipswich Town, including both games the season they went down. So if we do lose on Saturday, you suspect we will lose twice to Ipswich when they go. And it's just a funny old team, but they will be without the guy who got sent off on the old Man United goal. Was it Twanzebe who got sent off against Villa? And I think they had an injury. Jack Clark might have been injured. No, it was the guy on loan from Brighton, and Ciso who got injured. But they still got a point at Villa, although they got absolutely battered by Villa. They got a new goalkeeper who they signed from, I think, West Brom, who made a number of saves. It was like Tim Krul against us. Remember that? You too young for that?
No, I know that one. And also, I think I mentioned on a previous pod that Jaskalainen at Bolton did it as well. Yeah, 2 names that absolutely
3 keepers. There was Tim Krul, that one. There was Jaskalainen, you're absolutely right. Yeah, the best game of his life. And De Gea at Wembley.
That De Gea performance when we lost 1-0.
In fairness, I look back at that, I swear to God, everything was straight at him.
It was all feet. He saved everything with his feet.
Everything was straight at him.
Yeah, that was when Phil Jones did Harry Kane.
But yeah, I think this is... Go on, sorry.
No, they've got a new goalkeeper who they signed called Alex Palmer from West Brom. Made his debut, saved everything on Saturday, but hopefully that was his clutch moment, as the Yanks say.
I think... Louis Stevenson needs to be careful, because he has made a comment that one could interpret as entitled, where he says have to be winning against Ipswich, and I absolutely agree. I think this is...
Sorry, Gary, I have to... Steve Cherry for Notts County. Brilliant late 80s, early 90s reference from the name I can't pronounce. Go on.
I agree with Louis Stevenson. I think this is... I think there's a hell of a redemption arc. But if there is to be one, he cannot lose this game or draw.
What does that mean? He's here now. He's not going anywhere.
No. If he is going to make a case to be manager next season,
correct,
this is a game that he has to win. If you're going to Ipswich with a week between games, so you haven't got the excuse of tired, you've got players coming back into the fold where we can make 5 subs against United, all first team players coming on. This is not a game that there are any excuses. There are no excuses.
No centre forward. Is that going to be the new excuse?
No, sorry, you've got Tell, right? And I know that he's young and raw and all of that, okay? But you cannot go into a game against Ipswich away with 7 days rest, and players coming back fitter and fitter, stronger and stronger, and expect to be manager next season if you don't win.
This is why I say he's still auditioning for his
Jack
job.
Clark-
And so I agree. And if that makes me entitled,
Jack Clark's going to score a hat trick, isn't he?
I think he came on and then came off. The ultimate.
Yeah, but he was on it like 15 minutes.
Yeah, but he
and
didn't
then-
last long.
yeah,
Second
like
half, he got dragged him off.
60th, yeah.
Yeah. All right. We'll let
Delap's good though, isn't he?
I could
Delap
not
is
tell
good.
you. He's a very good player. I could not tell you the last time. I have no recollection of when we last played at Portman Road. The only thing that I remember is Jason Cundy.
Cundy.
That was, do you know that goal?
Yeah, didn't we? We had him on and talked about it. Is that the
Yeah.
guy we talked to him about?
Yeah,
Yeah, he made a slide tackle
And it went
basically
in.
just
Yeah.
ballooned in from the halfway.
Well,
yeah.
the last time we won at Portman Road, my
Was it that game?
friends, was
No, we drew 1-0 that game.
John Walk. John
I
Walk
believe we were
scored.
1-0 down when that went in.
The last time we won there was 3-1 in August 1994. Klinsmann
Are
got
you
2.
joking me? We've not won this since
No,
'94.
Klinsmann got 2 and Dimitrescu got 1, but we've barely played there. They didn't stay around in the Premier League for too
When did you
long.
say 91?
94. We've
94.
played there only twice since then. They beat us 3-0 in December 2000, and they beat us 2-1 the year they went down in January.
So that's the last time we've
2002.
won there.
Yeah.
Okay, that means we've never won at Ipswich in my lifetime. This weekend's
Yeah, but
today.
there'll be plenty of Spurs
Today.
fans who weren't around when the last time we beat United twice in the Premier League season.
Yeah, true.
Hasn't happened in the
that makes
Premier League.
sense. Not beating
It's Man
Ipswich is
United, yeah.
like-
We were going to go, but Peter Kahigas has written, here's a question for you all,
Yeah,
and hasn't
he-
yet written the question.
You've got 15 seconds, Peter.
So we'll do the predictions quickly for Portman Road. James Robbins
3-1.
to Spurs.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I was
Yeah,
gonna
sorry, I
go
always
that.
do that. I never clarify which team, but yeah, 3-1 Spurs.
Gary,
I was going to go 3-1 Tottenham.
you're not allowed now.
Oh, I'll go 2-0 Tottenham.
Okay.
Third clean sheet in a row.
I predicted us to beat Man United. That was rare for me. I am going to say that you've done the two. Oh, all right, 1-0 Spurs. Solanke back in mid-March. I reckon that they'll all just be back for the Europa League round of 16. I'm still waiting for Peter's question.
Come on, Peter.
Come on, Peter. What's your question? Anything else to report,
No,
gentlemen?
Peter needs her up, so I need a wee.
Gary's 3 beers, 2.5 beers down because one of them was all ahead.
Who's
and he's away.
injured for Ipswich? Who's out? Tuan Zabi's out.
Wait, Peter's question. If Slot lost the keeper, 2 main centre-halves, Salah and Nunes for the rest of the season, do you still think he wins anything?
No, but
I think from
they'd
the
be fifth. I don't think they would have gone down to 15.
But that's it. That's exactly it. And by the way, from the position that they're in, I still think they win the league. But that's exactly the point. Is I think if other managers had suffered the injury crisis that Ange has, and let's be clear, because one stat that we didn't mention so far is on this piece. John spoke about there not being enough evidence yet of Ange's methods causing injuries.
Yeah.
I kind of disagree. I think last season we had the 5th highest number of injuries in the Premier League.
Oh, yeah,
The
we had 13 out for a bit last season.
Sorry,
I think it was like 13 out or a huge
Yeah.
number of players out.
yeah,
for a
yeah.
point
So last season, without Europe, we had the 5th highest number of injuries in the Premier League.
Yeah.
The 4 teams above us had European football. We did not. But that means to say that we were the top team without Europe with the most injuries, and there were still teams in Europe who had fewer injuries.
Celtic had an injury crisis in his first season of hamstring injuries.
Yeah,
and his
we've
time
done
at-
all
So-
that. We've
so-
done all that.
Yokohama as well in COVID also had a lot of injuries because they had a mad schedule.
So-
So,
so-
he's
so-
sort of everywhere he's gone, he's had
Everywhere
injuries.
has gone, and so I'm not necessarily subscribing to this theory that there's not enough evidence. And of course, we can't say it's because of him. Of course, we can't. But at the same time, there does seem to
The evidence
be
points you
a
somewhere.
fair track record.
Yeah.
And my big concern is
Actually, he said it. He said it. He said in interviews, he said in presses that the style of play will lead to injuries. It's just that he said the man has said it himself.
We've been there. I'm hoping now we're over it. He's also gone on record this weekend and said that other teams are now going to feel what we felt. But there's no guarantee. We might too. We're just hopeful we are over that line now, and it's going to be uphill.
But to go back to the question, I think if any other manager had suffered through misfortune, probably not in our case, the injury crisis that we have had, of course there is going to be a drop off. Of course there is. If Ruben Amorim has these injuries until the end of the season,
yeah, they're buggered.
They're buggered. But I guarantee you they dig out results. I guarantee you they win a couple of games, 1-0, 2-0, whatever it is, and they dig out a couple of results. They wouldn't, they're already in a terrible position. But if it had been Liverpool, if it had been Slot, I don't think they slide down to 15th in the table.
Yeah, long answer to what Billy Four Eyes said was a rhetorical question. All right, we're
Sorry,
done,
Bill.
Gentlemen. Tottenham Hotspur are going to beat Ipswich. We're going to win 3 games in a row.
And the Europa League.
Oh,
God, I can't.
we are going to be on before May. So
Saying
we'll
that
talk
scares
about
me.
You
that.
came here saying you wanted to be positive. I'm just...
Yeah, but I'm also a pessimist at heart, so it's still hard for me to be positive.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. We will be back Monday week. Have we got a game after Ipswich?
City.
I mean, we
next.
must do.
Is it
No,
City
but I didn't know
next
if there's
or
that break. Oh, it's
We've
City,
got
City on that
Is it
Wednesday.
on Wednesday night?
Yeah, all right. I need to think about that.
Let's look at our fixture list quickly. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Wednesday 26th, then
Yeah.
Bournemouth, and Fulham.
Yeah, there's some breaks because FA Cup and internationals coming up. All right, gentlemen, we're back Monday week, probably the normal time of Monday morning. Thank you for all your comments, good and bad.
Spence won the poll.
Oh yes, the poll of who's the best fullback at the club, Spence, Porro,
I
or
think it's
Udogie.
recency bias, but he's
Gary's
great.
It's like an Arsenal poll on Twitter. Gary's got everyone to vote. All right, gentlemen, we'll see you next week. I think James is listening and hopefully presses the button. Oh, I can just press the end stream button here. Okay, I'm going to do it. Thank you, everybody. And up the Spurs. I'm going to press the button.
Start my own stream now.